What time is it at? What time is it at? Same time?
The next session.
I ain't going to that.
You should for your class. Hey, here. Where are you going? Is it where?
Okay, hello everybody. I have 1:15 on my clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started so that our session runs smoothly and you can get to your next session as well. I'm Dr. Lord. I'm here as our moderator today for our speaker, Dr. Troy Abel. Thank you for joining us in the afternoon session. We know you have choices, so we're glad that you showed up to come here. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Troy Abel and hand the microphone off in a second here. Dr. Troy Abel is an award-winning author, teacher, and professor of environmental science in the Department of Urban and Environmental Planning. Dr. Troy Abel is an affiliate faculty member of the political science at Washington University. He is also an affiliate member of the Seattle University Center for Environmental Justice and Sustainability. He received a bachelor's degree in public health from Indiana University and from George Mason University. He earned a master's degree in public administration and Ph.D. in public policy. Dr. Abel's expertise includes climate risk governance, environmental justice, and political biogeography. Very interesting. He received Western Washington University's 2017 Social Justice Teaching Award and was a co-recipient of the 2012 Linton Keith Capital Prize for the best book on environmental politics. So please help me in welcoming Dr. Troy Abel. Give a round of applause.
Thank you very much. The microphone in a good spot. Yeah. So I always like to engage my audience with an initial question. So, do you remember the first time you heard the concept of environmental justice? Just raise your hand if you remember. How many was it in class? Okay. Did you see it in the news? How many of you have ever experienced environmental justice? Okay. So today's talk, I've titled the Sinews of Environmental Justice, and thanks to your symposium invitation, I got to learn about Churchill and the Sinews of Peace lecture. And like many of you, I've been flailing to understand the flooding the zone strategy in our current political administration and how many policy changes are happening and how much science is being, frankly, of my students who helped zero in on this kind of conflict that was seemingly ramped up. And when I came and looked at Churchill's speech, it inspired me. But maybe some of you also have heard about environmental justice because of what we're doing in Washington State. We have defined in law environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental rules, laws, and policies. We have 3 seminal laws: the Clean Energy Transformation Act, which put us on a path to have carbon-free electricity by 2045, but also that the burdens and benefits of the clean energy transition would be equitably distributed in the state of Washington. That was in 2019. Then in 2021, we made environmental justice history by passing 2 laws. First, the Healthy Environment for All Act, which gave this definition, and the Climate Commitment Act, which, while setting up a cap and trade program for greenhouse gas emitters in our state, also established a fund where 35% of the funds would be dedicated to communities in the state of Washington overburdened by traditional pollution sources. And further, all of those things went beyond just a definition and identified action targets. So addressing disproportionate environmental health impacts and prioritizing vulnerable populations in overburdened communities, the equitable distribution of resources and benefits, and most importantly, eliminating harm. But maybe some of you actually heard about environmental justice for the first time when the Environmental Protection Agency accused the Missouri Department of Natural Resources for violating the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And EPA accused your state's agency of limiting non-English speakers from participating in public comment periods, failing to staff a position for Title VI environmental complaints, and discriminating during permit renewals for a Kinder Morgan facility in St. Louis on the Mississippi River. So I wanted to try to bring the environmental justice conflict to Missouri. It was here. My first paper on environmental justice was about St. Louis's skewed risk rate. But this is how I'll bring us back to Missouri briefly. 6 months later, in November 2021, Department of Justice officials from Biden's administration opened an environmental justice investigation about Alabama's Department of Public Health. They focused on chronic water pollution and flooding disparities in a predominantly non-white Loudoun, L-O-W-N-E-D-S, anywhere from Alabama, Loudoun County. Nearly 70% of that locale's residents identified as Black or African alone in our 2020 census. The next year, New York Times reporters noted a shift in federal EJ efforts from symbolic to substantive. Reminds me of academics contrasting symbolic, procedural, and substantive policies as you see here in this figure. And those reporters observed that this time the Department of Justice instructed all 93 attorneys' offices across the U.S. to pursue environmental justice investigations. Those reporters added that choice of Loudoun County was purposeful. It was a voting rights battleground and a focal point of Martin Luther King Jr.'s march from Selma to Montgomery in 1965, making it a logical choice to open a new, using the journalist's words, a new front on civil rights, according to Russian Freedom. Other fronts in the battle against environmental justice kept opening. And earlier, actually in 2021, EPA announced the Title VI investigation into the city of Chicago's permitting of a metal scrap shredder move from a wealthy, mostly white North Side neighborhood to a poorer, predominantly non-white South Side community. 8 months later, in September of 2021, EPA requested Michigan's Department of the Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy to lay a permit for a hot mix asphalt plant in the Genesee Township near Clinton, Michigan. Then a month later, EPA accepted a Title VI complaint in October of 2021 against Texas's Commission of Environmental Quality and their regulation or their lack of regulation of a coke refinery in Port Arthur. Petitioners claim Texas's environmental agency failed to secure or to require scrubber technologies commonly used in refineries to control sulfur dioxide emissions. Then in November 2021, Detroit residents filed a Title VI complaint against Michigan's environmental agency over a permit issued to a Jeep auto plant. But in 2022, EPA started its biggest Title VI fight. In October of 2022, EPA wrote a letter of concern to Louisiana's Department of Environmental Quality and Health. They concluded that Louisiana agencies mistakenly thought its Title VI obligations under the Civil Rights Act did not apply to their air permitting processes, programs, or duties to inform Louisiana residents about health threats from air toxic exposure and to regulate area-wide emissions. In other words, while Louisiana may have been meeting its environmental requirements for the Clean Air Act, the persistent air pollution disparities impacting communities of color in the industrial corridor known as Cancer Alley, 85 miles between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, likely violated Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Likewise, in the 2022 interim guide to EJ and civil rights and permitting, EPA emphasized that environmental law compliance does not guarantee compliance with civil rights law. When state and regional clean air authorities receive federal grants, they are obliged to implement effective Title VI compliance programs, while also ensuring their actions do not involve discriminatory treatment and do not have discriminatory effects, even when facially neutral. EPA attorneys added that it's, quote, time to use the full extent of its enforcement authority under Federal Civil Rights Act, including Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So EPA's Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights opened a Title VI front in Louisiana. The agency's Deputy Assistant Administrator for External Civil Rights, Lillian Dorka, wrote in that Title VI investigation, quote, EPA could examine not only the burdens or harm resulting from each individual policy, decision, or action, and borne disproportionately on the basis of race, but also the total or cumulative burdens, including exposures throughout a person's lifetime, borne disproportionately by a community. So in the Biden administration, disparate impacts now join disparate treatment, as equal fears derive from Title VI. But according to a Congressional Research Service analyst, when a different administration adheres to a different disparate impact theory. Title VI becomes a very different instrument, while disparate treatment theory remains consistent. Unexpectedly, actors in the Trump administration, following all this Biden administration activity, embraced a very different picture or theory of disparate impacts and disparate treatment. Not disparate impacts, the same disparate treatment. So, as I struggled with all of the changes, I also remembered back to the first Trump administration, and as I was thinking about the connection to Westminster and Churchill's Sinews of Peace, I went back to this exploration that my students I did on the information war. I teach a class on environmental research and communication, how to help create better environmental narratives that connect with more people and are still evidence-based. And we have seemingly lost our ability as a society, as a polis, to accomplish that anymore. And there was one 2017 editorial that continues to stick in my mind by Danny Westney, one of our editorialists. The information war is real, and we're losing it. This story struck that chord. No, it slapped a drum cymbal. And what Professor Starberg concluded provocatively that we may be headed toward the menace of unreality, which is that nobody believes anything anymore. Alex Jones, the CEO of InfoWars, she said, is a kind of prophet. It really is an information war for your mind, and we're losing it. She analyzed the content of sites to try to answer the question, just what is this alternative media ecosystem saying? And she started studying social networks to help people respond to disasters. And it just so happened that one disaster they were studying coincided with the timing of the Sandy Hook shooting. And Starberg and her team got dragged down a rabbit hole of Twitter-boosted conspiracy theories and ended up mapping our political moment. And that map is behind her in that picture, where you see the outsized influence of references to stories on InfoWars, as opposed to traditional media sources like the Washington Post, the New York Times there. All those alternative media sources are in blue. And what they began to put together is that this isn't a traditional left-right political axis. The true common denominator, she found, is anti-globalism, deep suspicion of free trade, multinational business, and global institutions. The anti-globalists often included the mainstream, anti-mainstream media, anti-immigration, anti-science, anti-U.S. government, and anti-European Union. And I've been reeling since 2017, trying to make sense of what is happening on a number of levels. And recently a TV character explained, I feel like I'm in one of those Escher paintings. Everything's connected, but nothing makes sense. However, your invitation did begin helping. Churchill's history here also helped. And with apologies to Winston and any of our historians here or fans of Churchill, I'm going to extend his framing of the sinews of peace to the sinews of environmental justice. Now I have a confession. I had to go look up the definition of the sinew. I'm going to bet all of you already know what that is, but These are the tendons and ligaments that provide structure and support within the human body. And some of the fog began clearing. I began thinking about a parallel structure between the sinews of peace and U.S. environmental justice politics. But first, I'll just extract 4 sinews from that famous Iron Curtain speech. I welcome your recommendations on how to improve that framing in the future. But imagine dozens of fiber-like sinews stretching between these 4 elements. First, the alliance, or special relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States. And when you hear, even a couple of days ago when the second state visit to King Charles was announced from the Trump administration, they continue to use that phrase, this special relationship. So that's the first sinew. The second is the unified English-speaking nations of the world, as I interpreted Churchill's speech. Third, the imagination of a strong United Nations leading military forces from member countries that we now recognize as UN peacekeeping forces. And then finally, and really my rooting of this presentation and the theme of this conference, Western principles of free speech, independent courts, and the people's right to choose their governors. But think about Churchill's rhetorical move. He was offering sinews to counter that Iron Curtain. And many would subsequently trace the beginning of our recognition of a Cold War to Churchill in this very campus in 1946, defining the moment the Cold War started. So, I offer to you today 4 sinews of environmental justice. EJ law and enforcement, like we were seeing in the Biden administration, and like we've established a foundation in state law in Washington State. That sinew does not exist for environmental justice here in the state of Missouri. And it is being torn apart by this administration at the federal level. And in fact, that tearing apart of law and policy is how I began to recognize that, yes, these are the sinews of environmental justice, is because they're trying to tear them down. So the first one is environmental law and enforcement. The second one is environmental justice science. The third are EJ groups. And finally, the EJ principles themselves. So maybe some of you heard about environmental justice for the first time on January 20th of this year. Trump signed Executive Order 1418, canceling 75 Biden executive actions, including 2 addressing environmental equities and inequities. But that executive order also canceled the Executive Order 12898 that had stood since 1994 as signed by then President Bill Clinton and had survived through 2 terms of the Bush Jr. administration and the Obama administration. Bush Jr. and Obama left those untouched. But then you saw EPA dismissing science advisors. They dismantled the Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee. Other SAB committees and panels were dismissed. This happened 10 days later. So the speed at which the sinews were being attacked left our heads spinning. I had colleagues pacing the halls, wondering when their grants were going to be canceled. And many of them lost those grants. So to bring it back to Churchill and Sinews of peace, of course, the sinews of peace are what we tried to build to prevent war, another global war. And there is a lot of metaphors about war. You saw the information war earlier. This is Paul Krugman's 2023 New York Times article. Climate is now a culture war issue, but more broadly, I would quickly conclude now that environmentalism, anything environmental, is also a culture war issue. But the information war was always real, and it was always cultural. And it has a long anti-science narrative. If I had to pick the starting date of the environmental information war, it would be 1962, and the release of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, which was an attack on the pesticide industry, at least as they saw it, from a woman without a Ph.D., and we've been waging that information war ever since. And I found this 2012 publication in the American Sociological Review from a public health researcher, Gordon Goshow, who set out to test a thesis, the politicization of science in the public sphere, a study of public trust in the United States from 1974 to 2010. But others also talked about the Republican war on science. In 2005, Chris Mooney released this book. And what Mooney basically hypothesized is the first 2 decades of World War II, political parties and ideologies were largely neutral and even deferential towards the scientific community. So Mooney's account gives a story of the political neutrality of science unraveling in the 1970s with the emergence of the new right, a group skeptical of organized science and the intellectual establishment in colleges and universities. And so colleges and universities are, I would say, kind of like the production lines that we attacked in World War II for Germany. And we're seeing them attacked by this administration like we've never seen an attack on universities. The new right is often closely aligned with the religious right, promotes limited government, strong national defense, traditional values, against what they view as encroachments of a permissive and often chaotic modern society. And going back to Gashow's work, these are polling trends of public trust in science for each survey year by political ideology. Conservative, liberal, moderate. So the liberal line holds the top on trust in science being a stronger level of trust. You see, in the 70s, there wasn't a lot of difference, and it starts to fade. And actually, moderates, for most of this period, up until 1994, actually had less trust in science than conservatives. 1994 was a tipping point. Newt Gingrich and the Republicans retake the House for the first time in a generation. And we actually see trust in science widening more and more ever since that point. So look at the difference between diamonds and boxes. And it shows research ends in 2010. I have some students updating this timeline, and the gulf has continued to widen. Now, thinking about this war, Churchill, I'm on the Escher stair steps. I'm trying to make sense of this. So I remember this Prussian, Clausewitz. Oh yeah. Clausewitz said politics is war by other means. My memory was wrong. It is increasingly incorrect these days, I'm afraid to say. But what Clausewitz actually wrote in Book 1, Section 24 of On War, is that war is a mere continuation of policy by other means. The inversion, actually, I think, is attributable to a postmodern philosopher, Foucault. And Foucault proclaimed we can invert Clausewitz's proposition and say that politics is the continuation of war by other means. The role of political power is perpetually to use a sort of silent war to reinscribe that relationship of force and to reinscribe its institutions, economic inequalities, language, and even the bodies of individuals. Because Foucault was postmodern, this is a concerning connection, but I think an important one. So for Foucault, power is not a linear force, but a relationship. Power is exercised through a range of discourses, narratives, utterances, media, policies, behaviors, architecture, signs, symbols, even thoughts, through which power might be inscribed. Discourses operate socially, juridically, linguistically, institutionally, governmentally, and above all, economically. And knowledge of such discourses is a practice of that power, as power is a practice of knowledge. So Foucault and the postmoderns are part of a narrative turn in the academy and scholarship. I think they have contributed much to our understanding. But what concerns me is that we don't often remember that techniques of power may also be subverted, resisted, and delegitimized. And postmodernism does have limits that concern me. Because in that focus of language, institution, government, we often lose track of objective reality, and we can lose ourselves in simply subjective interpretations. And this is problematic for policy, and environmental policy in particular. If everything is subjective, everything is power, we have no public solutions that are feasible. And to put a point on the troubles, it is relativism, it's post-truth, and it really also is nihilism. And postmodernism and its social construction exhibits some of these concerning limits. And a constructivist or postmodern perspective turns the fundamental assumption of science on its head, arguing that scientific knowledges are made in historically, specifically, socially situated practices rather than found. So many constructivists argue that the very things we take to be the natural objects of scientific inquiry, reports, DNA, soil samples, are not found or discovered, but rather socially constructed. But in theory, if knowledge of the natural world is rooted in these social constructs and stories and ideology, it becomes more difficult or even sometimes impossible to establish reliable information and knowledge upon which to act. When disputes occur, what and who are we to believe? Few environmental academics like myself are unapologetic postmodern constructivists. Instead, they likely take the path of moderation, adhering to the idea that while environmental science is never free of social and contextual influences, these alone do not determine scientific findings in any simple way? How can we admit to a constructive nature and still take seriously the sticks and stones of a complex material world? Some constructivists themselves offer us a path of moderation, and they label it co-production. And they mean that there's an inevitable and ongoing process whereby humans and non-humans produce and change one another through their interaction and their interrelation. Social discourses and narratives are fundamentally material since they are crucial in directing human understandings, impacts in behavior, which in turn act to change landscapes, exterminate or generate new species, emit gases, change the flow of water. At the same time, however, these landscapes, species, and gases are social in that they act on and confront the taken for granted in dramatic ways, reworking social systems, discourses, and ways of understanding the world. Now, I could continue to focus on this war, this cultural, anti-environmental war we're in. I could offer you some pithy comments and maybe something that would make a YouTube clip like, we're in a cold civil war. Or I could elaborate on what may be an anti-environmental curtain descending in every red state in this nation. But instead of doing that, I want to go back to one of the sinews of environmental justice, and that's its science. And that's something I've been practicing for a long time. And instead of being a postmodern or even a positivist, I like to describe myself as a post-positivist, or someone engaged in a praxis of environmental justice. And I want to then turn to how that praxis unfolds. And my praxis really first came into clarity when I joined Paulina Lopez, the executive director of the Duwamish River Community Coalition, one of those DJ groups, one of the Sinews of environmental justice. In this op-ed, as we were formulating the HEAL Act and the Climate Commitment Act, we wanted to see more attention to environmental justice. So we wrote this op-ed that was published in the South Seattle Emerald, a BIPOC-run news media site in Seattle. And we simply titled our op-ed, Clean Air Everywhere for Everyone in Washington. We laid out both our argument and some disturbing facts like air pollution higher air pollution may be correlated with worse COVID-19 vulnerability and death. And we continued on this. And we start focusing on the power to define what air quality is and what healthy air quality is. So we turned to our regional clean air agency, the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, and in 2019, they offered this assessment of air quality in the Puget Sound region, which includes Seattle, Everett, Tacoma. In 2019, the overall air quality remained good, continuing the trend of improvement, though we still face challenges. So as a clean air agency, they have a great deal of power, as Foucault has helped us understand, in defining the terms and the conditions. So how do we challenge that? Well, we use their data and particulate matter readings from 4 different places in 2019. And so right here is Seattle. No, Seattle is orange. This is a Beacon Hill monitor. This is a monitor in the Duwamish River Valley in the south neighborhood where Pauline lives, and another monitor called the Duwamish air monitor on the north side of Georgetown, but more in the industrial district. And then this is another port city you may know about, Houston, Texas. So we did a simple organization of the annual readings in 2019 and pointed out that Houston and surrounding Harris County is one of the most industrial metropolitan areas, hosting 541 industrial polluters. We showed that the Duwamish River Valley, and in particular the South Park and the Duwamish, were more like Houston, Texas than they were Seattle, the rest of Seattle. So this is combining the Sinews of EJ groups and EJ science to challenge the truth that the Regional Clean Air Agency had profited on. And I think this is a way forward in our moment that will require you to get off your phones and the social media and to get out and do action, as our speaker this morning started talking about. So here's an interesting way to look at the Duwamish River Valley. You can kind of see the shading of the hills. I'm displaying major air pollution sources in those three monitors. This is the Beacon Hill monitor, this is the Duwamish monitor, this is the South Park monitor. And as we saw before, these two are worse regularly than this one. And here's another part of the governmentality of power. There's only one monitor in Seattle in the National Air Toxics Trend Station network. It's on Beacon Hill, and it's also between a golf course and a park. So, we had learned about the use of MOS as a very inexpensive air pollution sensing system. And we went out and got an Environmental Protection Agency grant, a grant we would not get in this administration, to collect over 200 samples in the Duwamish Valley. And we had two collection periods in 2019 and 2021. And so you can see the 2021 MOS samples. We went on the ridges. We did 2019. We also collected replicates, compared the two. They were comparable, so we could combine these two data sets. But more importantly, we did this with Duwamish Valley youth, high school students. They helped us collect the data, and we had collection protocols. We used those special bags that environmental scientists use to collect biological samples. They're kind of aluminum foil looking. But we also trained the students to do the MOS prep. But then we also wanted to help tell a story. And that story is that MOS are like canaries in the coal mine. They're epiphytes, they're air plants, so they collect air pollution from the atmosphere, no root system. So we now have a really inexpensive air pollution network, and it's a lot less expensive because after all, MOS does grow on trees. This is an infographic from an environmental justice technical guidance document that I helped the EPA craft. I was a science advisor first for EPA from 2014 to 2016. And I, again, was a science advisor starting in 20. They talk about finer scale data versus coarser scale, and the better data is finer. And with 226 monosamples, we provided a microscale resolution, and really a revolution. Our one stationary NAS monitor clearly is inadequate, and we set out to explore that. But we only have 26 of those nationwide. We followed Portland scientists and GIS scientific practices. Leading data visualization practices is a heat map like you see here, which projected lead concentrations. Red is higher concentrations, blue lower concentrations. We implemented a geostatistical procedure known as kriging, and the Duwamish River Valley's highest lead concentrations were highest near 3 metal recycling facilities. Sources that none of us scientists imagined, but the residents of the Duwamish Valley suspected. But conversely, remember that Beacon Hill monitor? That was a cold spot in our moss sample. So what we do through an environmental justice group and frankly youth is connect to EJ science, and we combine those things to take on the powerful institutions that are determining and making decisions, not making the right decisions about achieving environmental justice. And so I'm close to wrapping up here. The way I'd like to summarize this is environmental justice science should be 4D. What we do in our interdisciplinary method of environmental justice studio is map and analyze spatial distributions of stressors like heavy metal pollution. We then look at the demographics of social groups. We look at the differences in those groups, and if the differences are great enough, we can begin to characterize the disparities that end up being environmental injustices that we need to rectify and eliminate because of law and policy we now have placed in Washington State. And you might think about this as an EJ prism. So this leads me to come back to the 4 sinews of environmental justice. I think if you reflect on social media, the deaths of environmental justice, environmental science are being greatly exaggerated. They should concern us all for sure, but don't want to downplay that. But we can counter it by trying to protect those sinews, trying to make them stronger, and we can take action. And getting out into the environment is a pretty healthy thing for many of us. So I would encourage you to do that. And I will offer this final thought about environmental justice principles. When we think about environmental justice principles, we also think about peace and war. I was able to put Ronald Reagan and Nelson Mandela on the same slide. Nelson Mandela said peace is not just the absence of conflict, peace is the creation of an environment where we can all flourish regardless of race, color, creed, religion, gender, class, caste, or any other social markers of difference. Environmental justice principles. And then Ronald Reagan, especially in this moment after the recent assassination on a college campus, I think we should remember Reagan's words. Peace is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to cope with conflict by peaceful means. Thank you.
We have lots of time. We need a curiosity question. So does anybody have a
Okay.
I also talked about it. My question is manifold. So, with the defunding, the effective dismantling of the EPA, what do you see the future of environmental regulations, investigations, and policy becoming? And what do you think the long-term implications on environmental justice issues are under the current administration? What are these threats perceived or real that drive anti-environmentalism? Who benefits from dismantling the EPA and environmental justice research, and why do they want to have justice?
Yeah, anti-environmentalism is real, and it's in power, and it's a real threat. I wish I had some kind of panacea solution, but I think that the reservoirs of environmental justice power will remain in the blue states where there's law and policy, but there's also environmental justice scientists like myself, like your colleague here at Westminster, and others, and students like you. And eventually, power will change. And so we have to maintain those sinews of peace until we can get better results in the policy and political arena that is in the system of federal. Try to address several of the questions there. If you have questions.
Advice on how to
Yeah, I think that's where the power of language becomes so important. And scientists have to get, and environmental justice scientists in particular, have to get better with their narrative. I would recommend a series of books by Randy Olson. Apologies to my science colleagues. One of the initial titles is Don't Be Such a Scientist. And he talks about storytelling narrative that we need to get better at. Because it's the way humans communicate. Scientists' communication skills are not stellar. Olson offers a simple three-letter algorithm, and, but, therefore, the ABT framework. Watch any Star Wars movie, there are 3 acts, and, but, therefore. The problem with scientists, we tend to be and. Therefore, change your language, change your narrative, think about your audience more carefully. Others will talk about finding allies in conservative communities. Churches. I've been in contact with a church in St. Louis. One of their staff members reached out about pursuing a graduate degree at Western Washington University, so started a dialogue. I hope to maybe make a connection with them while I'm here. And I think your professors, it seems like you have several that are doing some really interesting research. And the education component that Marissa was talking about with me over lunch, getting to the next generation. Yeah.
Much of the time, do you think much more local governments like our city or county governments have on the environment and how we take action with that?
Yeah, I think it turns out actually local governments are really powerful because a lot of the land use decisions are made in communities, counties, and cities. I don't know what the planning requirements and zoning laws are in the state of Missouri. But in Washington State, we have a Growth Management Act, and we have a pretty robust planning system that still obviously fails to eliminate the harm of air pollution disparity. And so those air monitors are located, and those communities are located in an industrial zone. And so, and they're also red line. South Park was a red line neighborhood in the 30s. So land use and zoning are very they're high leverage places to change literally the distribution of environmental harms and benefits. Many of my students look at the distribution of environmental harms or tree treatment. Those are all things that you can do actionable science on and connect to environmental justice. Yeah, John? Professor John, can you call you?
Dr. John.
Dr. John?
When I have a really fast starter, they call me Dr. John.
Okay.
Boy, how do you confront the idea that clean air for everyone as a goal becomes, even if you hunker down in a blue state like Washington, how do you confront the idea that the air we breathe is a global thing, and that there's 434 coal-fired plants coming online every year, 434 coal-fired plants coming online every year, basically in China. And we're breathing CO2 and pollution that was produced in China, or was produced in Houston. And I'm wondering how you confront that reality, that we're living in a global world which is not conducive to environmental justice, or clean air, or a clean environment. What about the global problem?
Well, like any collective action problem, that's what climate change is, the biggest one. And I think some of us may get in a position at some point to be involved in those climate negotiations around the Paris Agreement. I hope it gets revived in the next administration. It's been back and forth, but ultimately I think to use a cliche is think locally but act locally, because acting locally and dealing with air pollution disparities in a community, in a region, in a state, begin to also lay the groundwork for how we deal with air pollution and pollution disparities on a global level. But ultimately, we have a Clean Air Transition Act. We're going to be carbon free not by 2045 as we stated in the law, but sometime after, if we keep working on connecting the Sinews and protecting them. That would be my cursory response to a very challenging question.
I would say every little bit that we do is positive.
What do you want on time, Martha?
We're still, we have time for maybe one more question, and then I have some announcements. I can always have some questions.
Thank you, Dr. John. Isn't there a musician named Dr. John?
Yes, I think so.
New Orleans.
New Orleans, yep, New Orleans.
You would know Dr. John. I think so. Okay. Go ahead.
I have a question for you. How do you approach these really large-scale environmental justice changes organizations? I know Dr. John brought up the idea of fire
It's a great question, not a plant because you can drive me around, but we just got an energy equity grant from Puget Sound Energy, one of our investor-owned utilities in the state of Washington, who have to comply with the Clean Energy Transformation Act. They have to ensure that their investments and their energy production and their energy savings and their distributed solar and wind are equitably distributed. They don't know how to do equitable distribution. They don't know how to measure it. So they've hired my team at Western to help them start to do that. And so many of the principles of geography and measurement we're going to deploy in an online energy equity atlas for the whole state. And they've come in and funded that. And we're going to use all the Sinews environmental justice to achieve it. So that's how energy equity is relatively new. We We've been doing a literature review. Really only started around 2017. So this is a new policy arena, and we're bringing a lot of our criminal justice background to bear, and it really is an extension of many of the things we've seen here today. Distributed energy resources are going to be more equitable than big coal fire power plants, or for that matter, big wind turbines or big wind farms in a particular concentrated region. None of those things really actually meet the principles of environmental justice. Distributed energy, where we all have a turbine or a solar panel on our house, or get it from a community solar system in our for renters. So that's how we get access to carbon-free electricity in the future in Washington State.
I'm going to say we can move up the chat afterwards, but we're going to give another round of applause for this.
Glasgow area up there. Derek and I have been doing work together now since 2016. Yeah, when you were a PhD student. And I wanted to thank you very much personally in front of all your students and colleagues for your generosity and grace.
A couple of announcements, just as a reminder, the program has some incorrect rooms. So if you're going to a 2:30 breakout session with Lisa Perlman, that's now in CSC 203. Rodney Weil is in CSC 138. Allison Priscilla is in CSC 139. So Lisa Perlman will be in 203, this building. Weil will be in 138, this building. And Priscilla will be 139, this building.
Thank you for saving my retirement. Good fun. I'll save you. Yep. That's the Indiana football
Wait. Where are you going?
Looking forward to
I like that one. Yeah. I like that good one.
Oh, really?
You couldn't go over that. I might honestly need your notes.
You know,
Yeah, if I can read them. I'm going to be running miles.
All right, I'll see you later, Johnson.
Hey, guys. Okay. We'll get it. This is actually
That's your just in case.
but I wasn't quite fit enough to learn.
Beard.
I don't know. There should be someone there. I don't know if you've ever read that.
Should I check? Doesn't need to go.
I think it looks fine.
All right.
It's really up to what is it or
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to go on down. We got Rodney Miles and got
is it in the scene?
Yeah. No, I'm okay. Yeah, good luck making this camera for
Let's go. Our own presentation. This is the one that. No, that's fine. I thought we only had to do two.
Yeah, okay. She changes us over there. You just need to go upstairs and to the left and down the hall. Ma'am, what are you doing?
So for the assignment, we only do two because I saw and I thought it was on.
Reaction paper, yeah, you go to 3, but only two.
So apparently,
Yeah, I think.
the one I was reading was,
2 out of 3.
so I'm kind of conflicted. This is Glasgow's mother report, but this is right up my alley. So I am inclined to listen to Jing Jing Yu. Got it? Very well. Let's do it.
Hey.
Hello?
There we go.
Hi.
All right. Lisa, your PowerPoint will be. No, she's
I tried to get it out of it. Here.
Okay. Okay. Okay, great.
But also, once you start the presentation, anyways.
She's in 2126. That's where I said it right there. Position yourself where you see it, or is that good enough? Anything else? She should have a clicker ready to go. No, she has it. If she has a mic, she just needs to turn it on. Yeah. I think everything is good. I think we got to switch it up. Yeah.
Great. Welcome.